AI making podcasts, like full-on conversations, two hosts, the whole thing. You sent this in about Google's NotebookLM, and wow, this is way bigger than just tech news. This could change how we learn about anything.
You know, it's funny, we hear about AI writing text all the time, but audio dialogue, that's a whole different challenge. What's interesting about NotebookLM is it's structured to create a back and forth, just like what you'd hear on a real podcast.
Okay, so from what I skimmed in the article, no judgment, we've all been there. NotebookLM is like you feed an AI info and you get a finished podcast episode back.
Yeah, that's the gist, but it's more nuanced, right? Imagine you give NotebookLM a research paper, not just the paper itself, but also all the sources it cites, maybe even like some lecture notes on the topic. And then NotebookLM uses all these different pieces of information to have a conversation, almost like two AI researchers discussing what they've learned.
Okay, that's pretty wild. But to play devil's advocate for a second,
Okay.
how human can this AI sound? Like, are we talking robotic voices reading scripts, or is it something more natural?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. And to understand how it works, it helps to look at Andrej Karpathy. He's a leading figure in AI, used to head up AI research at Tesla, and he's been using NotebookLM to make an actual podcast.
Hold up, wait, a real podcast. So this isn't just theoretical anymore. Okay, I need details. What's Karpathy's podcast like?
It's called Histories of Mysteries, and you can actually find it on Spotify if you want to give it a listen. What makes it so compelling is how he uses a combination of different AI tools. For example, he's using ChatGPT to help him choose topics.
ChatGPT, that rings a bell, but just remind me, what's that again?
Essentially, ChatGPT is a text-based AI that's really good at generating different creative text formats. So think like poems, code, scripts, even just answering your questions in a really comprehensive way makes it great for brainstorming. So Karpathy uses ChatGPT to kind of narrow down some potential topics, and then he takes that information and feeds it to NotebookLM. So let's say the topic is like the lost city of Atlantis. He'd give NotebookLM the Wikipedia entry about Atlantis, maybe some articles about it.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So NotebookLM takes that raw information and turns it into a podcast episode.
Precisely, and it doesn't stop there. Remember how I mentioned those different AI tools? He used another one called Ideogram to create the podcast art. So the whole process from topic selection to the final product is driven by AI.
Wow, a full AI production team. That's both amazing and a little unnerving. But before we get into all the what-ifs, what did Karpathy think of the final product? Did NotebookLM live up to the hype? And more importantly, was it any good?
He's actually pretty positive about it, but he's careful to point out that, he sees NotebookLM as a tool, not a replacement for human creativity. Like he describes his role as more a curator. He's still making choices about the direction, the overall feel of the podcast. But the AI is handling that actual production.
So instead of spending hours researching, writing scripts, editing audio, he can focus on the big picture stuff. That's a game changer, right? I mean, does this mean anyone with an internet connection can suddenly become like a podcasting pro?
It's an interesting thought, isn't it? Kind of reminds me of when blogging first emerged. Suddenly, anyone could be a writer, a journalist, a commentator. And there was this initial explosion of content.
Which can be both good and bad.
Right.
More voices, more perspectives, but also the potential for a lot of noise to cut through.
Exactly, and that's what's interesting about what Karpathy's experiment sort of highlights.
Yeah.
It's not that AI is just going to replace podcasters. It's going to change what it means to be a podcaster. It's going to demand a different skill set, curation, critical thinking, having a strong point of view that can cut through all that noise.
It's almost like the AI is handling the technical how of podcasting, which frees up humans to really focus on the why, the big ideas, unique perspectives, the things that make a podcast worth listening to in the first place. But what does that mean for the actual content?
Well, Karpathy actually believes that this could lead to like an explosion of niche content. Imagine a podcast about the history of typography or the evolution of a specific genre of music. AI could make it possible to produce, really high-quality content for even the most specialized interests.
And on the flip side, listeners could request AI-generated podcasts on topics that they're curious about. Even if those topics are so specific, no human has even made a podcast about it yet. Talk about personalized learning. But are these AI-generated podcasts actually any good? Like, would we actually want to listen to them? That's the big question, right? Like, it's one thing to have AI make a podcast, but does it actually, connect with listeners the way something crafted by a human does?
Well, we actually listened to part of an episode of Histories of Mysteries earlier, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
I always have thoughts. Honestly, it was better than I expected. The pacing felt a little off at times, and the AI voices were, they were clearly synthetic, good, but not quite human. What struck me, though, was the information itself. Like, it was well researched, it was clearly presented, and I genuinely learned something new about the topic, which is always a win in my book.
Yeah, and I think that's what Karpathy is sort of getting at here. It's not that AI will replace human creativity, but that it can handle a lot of the heavy lifting of content creation, which then frees us up to focus on the elements that are uniquely human.
Yeah, it's like the difference between someone handing you a stack of research papers versus that same information being presented in this really engaging way with visuals, maybe some music. The raw data is the same, but the experience is totally different.
Exactly. And I think that's where the real potential is. Imagine a world where educational podcasts,
Hmm.
even just like corporate training materials,
Hmm.
are all tailored to your specific learning style.
Yeah.
I mean, we could see a resurgence audio learning, but personalized in a way that just wasn't possible before.
It's like AI could unlock this whole new level of human potential. If we're not so bogged down by the technical aspects of creation, we can really let our imaginations run wild.
And that's what I kind of hope listeners take away from this. Don't just ask, can AI make a podcast?
Hmm.
Ask, what can I do with this technology?
Yeah.
What stories can I tell? What knowledge can I share with the world now that these tools exist?
That's such a good point to end on. It's not about being afraid of the technology. It's about figuring out how we as humans can use it to our advantage, right? To tell better stories, to connect with each other in new and meaningful ways. And hey, maybe even learn a thing or two about ourselves along the way. If you're as fascinated by this whole AI podcasting revolution as we are, head over to Spotify, check out Andrej Karpathy's Histories of Mysteries. Let us know what you think. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into a topic that's got everyone talking. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those curiosity gears turning.